Norway in the late 1980s was a place the world saw as pristine, a country carved from fjords and folklore, a landscape where silence seemed carved into stone. Churches stood on their hilltops like watchtowers, their spires piercing the pale sky, ringing bells over towns that had known centuries of order. Children grew up in safe neighborhoods, laughter echoing off cold blue lakes, and most lives followed gentle, predictable paths shaped by the hum of modern comfort. But beneath that calm surface, a different world was taking shape. Not in the newspapers or the city squares, but in the basements that smelled of mildew and cigarettes, in bedrooms where teenagers taped black trash bags over the windows, in forests where bonfires crackled under runes carved into bark. This was the birthplace of something feral. Something that wanted to burn the world back to the bones of what it once had been. Something that rejected light so violently that darkness became sacred. They were young, angry, brilliant, isolated, and convinced that music should not entertain, it should wound. They wanted to create sound that felt like a curse, ideology that felt like a knife, and a movement that would stand forever at the edge of blasphemy. One band would become the heart of that shadow choir, a band whose name would echo through suicide, arson, murder, and myth until it no longer sounded like music at all. That band was Mayhem. By the time their legend fully formed, 2 men would be dead, churches would lie in ruins, and Norway, peaceful, orderly Norway, would discover it had birthed a monster it never saw coming. This is the story of a movement that mistook chaos for art, pain for authenticity, and death for transcendence. Today we are talking about the Infernal Legacy of Mayhem. I'm your host, Stacy Lee. Let's begin. Before Mayhem became a headline, before documentaries and courtrooms turned their story into cautionary legend, it was just 3 teenagers trying to make noise loud enough to drown out the world around them. And I know I'm going to butcher these names. In 1984, Øystein Aarseth, not yet Euronymous, not yet the self-proclaimed apostle of darkness, was simply a gifted, restless Norwegian kid with a cheap guitar and a fascination with the sinister. He connected with bassist Jørn Stubberud, later known as Necrobutcher, and drummer Kjetil Mannheim Haraldsson. Together they played music nobody else wanted to hear. Raw, abrasive, primitive metal that sounded like a demolition site set to rhythm. Their inspirations came from the most extreme corners of the underground tape trading culture. Venom, Balthery, Hellhammer, those types of bands. Not the polished metal that filled arenas, but the kind that rotted at the edges, deliberately ugly, sonically violent. Yet among these influences, Mayhem felt something missing. Other bands flirted with satanic imagery as theater, as a gimmick and a marketing tool, but Euronymous didn't want theater. He wanted devotion. Quietly, obsessively, he began shaping the ideology that would become black metal's spine. Evil was not an aesthetic, it was a discipline. Individuality was weakness. Extremity was truth. He devoured philosophy, totalitarian histories, and occult fragments, stitching a worldview that blended nihilism, anti-Christian fury, elitism, and a kind of cold, joyless mysticism. By the late 1980s, Euronymous was no longer just a guitarist. He was an architect, building something larger than a band, larger than music. When he opened a record shop in Oslo and named it Helvete, meaning hell, he knew exactly what he was doing. Helvete's basement became the unofficial headquarters for a loose collective known as the Black Circle, a gathering of young musicians and outsiders who had drifted there like moths to a black flame. They shared records, ideas, and obsessions. They talked about darkness like it was a religion. The walls were painted with demonic sigils, the air thick with smoke and ambition. Euronymous ruled the space like a priest, equal parts mentor and tyrant. And in this subterranean crucible, the seeds of catastrophe were quietly taking root. But Mayhem needed a frontman who could embody the horror Euronymous preached, someone who didn't merely perform death, but lived it and breathed it, walked hand in hand with it. And that's when a letter arrived from Sweden, signed by a young man who called himself Dead. Per Ohlin didn't wear corpse paint because it looked intimidating. He wore it because he believed it reflected his true state. Born in Sweden in 1969, he had been fragile from the start. A childhood medical collapse, a ruptured spleen that caused his heart to stop, left him clinically dead for a short period before doctors revived him. Friends later said he was never the same after that moment, as though he had left some essential part of himself in the void before returning. He grew up pale, reclusive, constantly ill, convinced that he didn't fully belong in the world of the living. He fixated on mortality. He carried dead animals, studied decay, spoke softly as if afraid of drawing too much attention from a universe he felt only loosely tethered to. When Dead joined Mayhem in 1988, he brought with him not just a voice, but a presence, an atmosphere. He didn't want applause. He wanted to unsettle. He wanted audiences to feel the cold breath of death on their necks. On stage, Dead transformed into something almost ritualistic. He cut himself with broken glass, letting blood drip into the front row. He screamed not with theatrical aggression, but with the despair of someone who had spent years drowning in his own skull. He buried his clothes in the ground to rot so he could smell like a corpse. He inhaled dead crow before shows to inhale death. He often wandered off into forests alone for hours with no explanation. To the fans, it was shocking. To the band, it was commitment. To Dead, it was simply his way of life. But inside the Krokstad house where Mayhem rehearsed, Dead's unraveling became impossible to ignore. He and Euronymous formed a toxic, lopsided dynamic, one rooted in fascination and cruelty. They became this little machine of two. We've talked about this phenomenon before, folie à deux, madness of two. Dead was sensitive and self-punishing. He was very introverted. Euronymous was domineering and theatrical and obsessed with authenticity at any cost. Euronymous mocked Dead's depression, shot guns outside his bedroom to startle him awake, and encouraged his self-harm on stage because it made the shows more real. The house they rehearsed in seemed to feed their madness. Its walls were covered in graffiti and bones. Its rooms smelled of unwashed clothes, rot, candle wax, and reheated fear. Dead wrote letters about ending his life. He fixated on leaving the world. And Mayhem's culture left no space for softness. Vulnerability there was a sin. Everyone saw the signs. No one intervened. To them, Dead's misery wasn't a medical emergency. It was black metal. On April 8th, 1991, Dead walked calmly into the woods behind the house with a knife and a shotgun. He slit his wrists, he slit his throat, and then he leaned forward and pulled the trigger. He was only 22 years old. That moment could have ended the story, but for Mayhem, it was only the beginning of a far darker chapter. When Euronymous discovered Dead's body, what he did next would define Mayhem's legend forever. He didn't call an ambulance. He didn't call the police. He left the house, drove to a store, bought a disposable camera, and returned with the calm of a man documenting an art project. He rearranged objects around Dead's body, adjusted the knife, positioned the shotgun, and collected skull fragments into a neat pile. He then took multiple photographs from different angles. The most infamous of those images is Dead's corpse lying on a stained floor, his skull blown apart, and the image became the cover of an underground bootleg album titled Dawn of the Black Hearts. That Polaroid traveled the world through tape trading networks, a morbid prize passed between fans like contraband scripture. Necrobutcher, horrified and disgusted, quit the band immediately. Rumors began to circulate that Euronymous had boiled and eaten pieces of Dead's brain, or fashioned necklaces from pieces of his skull. And later on, several people in this inner circle would confirm that necklaces were made from bone. Whether or not Euronymous consumed parts of Dead's remains is disputed, buried in the fog of myth and ego. For Euronymous, Dead's suicide validated everything. Black metal wasn't performance, it wasn't rebellion, it was sacrifice, and he had the proof. The record store, Helvete, became a pilgrimage site for young musicians who wanted to stand as close to the darkness as they could without dying themselves. The basement filled with extremists and teenagers desperate for meaning. They saw Euronymous not as a grief-stricken friend, but as a high priest who had witnessed a holy death. Dead's actions became fuel for a movement that would soon turn its ideology outward. Churches would burn, tearing down symbols of Christianity and spiraling deeper into violence. And as Euronymous basked in the macabre glow of his friend's death, a new figure stepped into the circle, a young man whose quiet intensity concealed something far more dangerous. Kristian Vikernes, soon to be known as Varg. He would transform Mayhem's darkness into something much more destructive than what existed before. The first fire came before dawn, June 6, 1992. Fantoft Stave Church, built in 1150, was a masterpiece of medieval woodwork, a towering relic of Norway's conversion to Christianity. Its ornate timbers had endured centuries of storms, wars, and winter snows. It had survived everything except the young men now circling Helvete's basement, like wolves searching for prey. Just before sunrise, the church roared to life. Flames climbed higher than the treetops, twisting through the air as if possessed. By the time the firefighters arrived, the church had collapsed into a smoldering grave of splinters and molten iron. The ashes stained the earth black, and people mourned the loss of this church. To the public, it was vandalism. To the underground, it was declaration. Rumors flew through Oslo with the speed of spent matches. The arson wasn't random. It was ideological. It was pagan vengeance. It was the first blow in a self-declared war against Christianity, and all threads of speculation pointed in the same direction. Helvete, the Black Circle, Varg, quiet, analytical, intense, had emerged as one of Euronymous' most devoted acolytes, though the relationship was already cracking under the weight of obsession and ego. Where Euronymous fantasized about extremity, Varg enacted it. His project, Burzum, produced music that felt like a seance, hypnotic and minimalist, almost ritualistic. He wore expressionlessness like armor, and he spoke calmly about arson as if he was discussing the weather. He hinted that Christianity had colonized Norway's soul. In his view, burning a church wasn't destruction, it was restoration. The police began to connect dots. Gasoline traces, shoe prints, and alibis that didn't match. Statements that felt rehearsed. But as the police investigated, the fires continued. Holmenkollen Chapel, Skjold Church, Haukedo Church, Osterøy Church. Each blaze grew bolder, each ruin darker. What began as isolated incidents soon felt like a coordinated ritual. Investigators arrived at the fires to find pentagrams and other cryptic marks burned into the earth or scratched into nearby stones. Whether left by arsonists or by opportunistic imitators, it didn't matter. The terror was real. Norway, unused to such violence, panicked. The media called it a satanic uprising. Politicians blamed youth culture. Parents blamed metal music. Metal fans blamed the newspapers. Inside the Black Circle, chaos fed ideology. The burned churches became trophies. Their charred frames appeared on album covers, and youth whispered about cleansing fire. The underground was no longer simply rebelling against society. It was reenacting ancient mythology, elevating destruction to sacrament. And through it all, Euronymous publicly fanned the flames. He gave interviews hinting at more violence. He praised the burnings as anti-Christian warfare. He encouraged others to follow suit, even as he privately worried that Varg was slipping beyond his shadow. What Euronymous never understood was that Varg had no intention of remaining second in command. The Arsons were only fuel for something bigger, a rising conflict within the Black Circle itself, a quiet rivalry sharpening into blade.
To ban a form of music they say has disturbing satanic overtones. It's called black metal music and encourages devil worship and the desecration of churches. The campaign follows the jailing of 4 young men in Kent for causing more than £100,000 of damage to graveyards. Jonathan Beale has this special report.
This is the type of music believed to be responsible for a wave of attacks on churches in Northern Europe. Called black metal music, it's overtly anti-Christian and synonymous with satanic worship. This church in Bergen, Norway was burnt to the ground. In all, 13 Norwegian churches have suffered a similar fate. Now, many fear that black metal music has taken a grip over here. Earlier this month, 4 young followers in Tunbridge Wells were jailed for causing £100,000 worth of damage to cemeteries and churches in the area. One of them, 18-year-old Paul Timms, is serving 30 months in a young offenders institute. His mother says he was a normal, happy boy until he became obsessed with black metal music.
They become almost absorbed in it. It is a driving force. They have to have it. I hate it so much that I've seen what it's done to our family on a personal level. And I want to see it banned. I want to see it off the face of the earth.
The CD and record covers of black metal music are littered with pagan symbols. Bands call themselves names such as Mayhem, Darkthrone and Cradle of Filth. The lyrics are often difficult to make out, but often carry a sinister message. Now, one Tunbridge Wells vicar who's lectured on the dangers of the occult has joined the campaign to ban black metal music.
When I heard it, almost a cold shiver goes down your spine, and you think, what is all this about? And what disturbs me is how is it possible that 4 boys from a decent, ordinary society with a Christian background, parents of 2 of the boys committed Christians, and I say, what on earth went wrong? Now, if it can happen to these sort of chaps, well, goodness knows what's going to happen to even more vulnerable people.
It's not just the music that's causing so much concern, but the image and lifestyles of the bands themselves. One member of the Norwegian group Emperor, seen here performing in the UK last year, has confessed to arson and burglary. Another has been charged with murdering a gay man. But those who promote black metal music in this country deny they're promoting crime.
There's nothing in the lyrics to pertain to people that they should go out and commit any acts against Christians or against anyone else. It has got satanic connotations, but I think it attracts people who are into extremes anyway. These are the sort of people who'd read horror books or be into true crime stuff. You can't ban it because it will just go underground and probably get a lot worse.
If we have censorship on films and television, have we ever realized that we might come to a time when we have to have censorship in music?
Black metal music can be bought at many record shops carrying no warning. But Veronica Timms believes the music must be banned. Without that, she fears her son will not be the last to be sucked into committing sacrilege, and black metal music will leave its ugly mark in this country, just as it has in Norway.
Jonathan Beale on the new black metal music.
It's not funny, but those interviews made me laugh. Those 4 Christian boys, how did this happen to these sort of chaps? And then the people talking about the lyrics, I just find it funny. I mean, the fires are not funny at all, but the idea that music is responsible for crime has always been laughable to me. People are responsible for their own actions. Can they be influenced by things they see and hear? Of course. But those things don't cause people to behave in any sort of way. People choose to behave criminally. But I look at these churches and they were absolutely stunning. They were so historic. They had been there for so long. And to watch them burn in those clips, it makes me sad. But the fire that consumed the churches was nothing compared to the fire burning between the members of Mayhem. By the summer of 1993, the tension between Euronymous and Varg had become volcanic. Their partnership, born of mutual fascination, had congealed into mutual suspicion. Varg believed that Euronymous owed him money. Euronymous believed Varg was plotting to take over his label. Both believed the other capable of violence, and both had whispered threats. Now, each of these guys had minions, disciples that were willing to listen to their side of the story. They were 2 ideologues in a shrinking room, each convinced the other was about to make the first move. But it would be Varg who acted. On August 10th, 1993, Varg and fellow musician Snorre Blackthorn Rush drove through the night from Bergen to Oslo. It was a 5-hour drive, the roads winding through forests and lakes under a low, indifferent sky. Blackthorn later said he thought the trip was about discussing contracts. Varg claimed he wanted to settle a debt. If you ask other people about this story, they believe that the plan was murder from the start. Varg and Blackthorn reached Euronymous' apartment around 3:30 a.m. Blackthorn waited in the stairwell as Varg climbed the steps to the 3rd floor. Whatever happened inside that red door remains contested. There were no witnesses, no recordings, only scars and speculation. But the end is known. Euronymous fled into the hallway in his underwear, bleeding and panicked. He screamed for help, banging on a neighbor's door. Varg pursued him down the stairwell, stabbing him repeatedly. 23 wounds in total, including the fatal thrusts to his skull and torso. When Euronymous collapsed near the bottom of the staircase, leaving a trail of blood on the concrete, the ideology he had spent a decade building bled out with him. Varg returned to the car, hands trembling, not with fear, but with something colder, and Blackthorn began to drive. The next day, Varg spun an elaborate story about self-defense, claiming Euronymous had plotted to kill him. Yet the evidence that surfaced, the knife, the travel planning, and the nature of the wounds told a narrative with no room for accidents. Within days, police raided Varg's home. Inside, they found explosives, weapons, detailed writings, and stolen ammunition. There was other evidence that linked him to multiple church burnings. It was the final unraveling of Norway's black metal underground. The black circle collapsed in on itself like a dying star. Mayhem was shattered, dead gone by suicide, Euronymous by murder, Necrobutcher gone long before due to disgust, and the remaining members were traumatized and directionless. Varg was put on trial, and during that trial, he appeared almost serene. He smirked at cameras, he taunted reporters, and he treated the proceedings like theater. Norway, normally so composed, watched in stunned fascination. The quietest country in Europe now had a devil in the courtroom, or at least someone who desperately wanted to be seen as one.
Varg Vikernes, født 11.2.73, dømmes til en straff av fengsel I 21 år.
Vikernes ble dømt for overlagt drap. I tillegg ble han dømt for å ha tent på Holmenkollen kapell I Oslo, Skjold kirke I Rogaland, Åsane kirke i Bergen og for forsøk på ildspåsettelse av Storetveit kirkes klokketårn i Bergen.
Varg's sentencing was swift, 21 years in prison, Norway's maximum penalty, but the story was not over. Black metal would continue, louder, uglier, mythologized at this point. And Mayhem, against every odd and omen, would rise again. After the murder, after the trials, after the cameras stopped rolling, and the smoke of burned churches dissipated into cold Nordic air, Norway tried to bury the chaos. But some stories don't decompose, they fossilize. Mayhem did not disband. They limped forward, reshaped by tragedy, filling their ranks with new musicians who carried the weight of the band's legacy like an iron shroud. Their debut album, De Mysteris Dom Sathanas, was released in 1994. Its completion overshadowed by the fact that its producer was dead and its bassist imprisoned for killing him. The album became a cipher, a text studied by fans and critics alike, hailed as genius by some and blasphemous by others. Its sound, cold, cavernous, ritualistic, embodied the very madness that had birthed it. It was a requiem and a resurrection, an artifact carved from blood and obsession. Meanwhile, the black metal scene fractured. Some bands embraced the notoriety. Others distanced themselves from violence. Documentaries dissected the movement with clinical fascination, while films dramatized it with varying degrees of truth. Years and years ago, I stumbled on this film. I did not know the story of Mayhem before I watched the film Lords of Chaos. Apparently, the band members hate this film, and I can see why. It really pokes fun of the way the band tries to portray themselves as very dangerous. I distinctly remember a scene where there's a guy in full face paint, like dead person face paint, and he's eating an ice cream cone. That's the scene that I remember. But Lords of Chaos is not the only film that's been made about these events. Writers argued whether Mayhem had been pioneers or provocateurs, victims of ideology or architects of destruction. Euronymous became a martyr to some, a tyrant to others. Dead became a myth, a spectral presence hovering over the genre he helped define. Varg became an exile, later a controversial online figure, rebranding himself while never fully escaping the gravity of his past. I don't see Varg as any sort of interesting or mythical character. How do I say this without making anyone mad? I don't care. He is a far-right provocateur, so extreme that he has been banned from YouTube. I mean, he's out of prison. He got the maximum sentence. This is Europe, you know. I guess he lives in France now, and he is, it's kind of a piece of shit. The burned churches were rebuilt, their new beams pale against the memories of their charred ancestors. Snow covered the ruins. Tourists visit them without knowing what had stood there before, unaware that the ash beneath their feet was mixed with the remains of a cultural war. Through it all, Mayhem continued, a band forever haunted by its own origin story, performing music forged from tragedy while trying to step out of the shadow of the deaths that made them infamous. The legacy of Mayhem is complicated, fractal, almost impossible to summarize. It's a testament to youthful self-destruction, to ideology unchecked, to the seductive pull of extremity. And the story is a warning, wrapped in a legend for sure, but proof that rebellion becomes deadly when it forgets where the boundary between performance and reality lies. But the fascination endures. I mean, we're talking about it today. Because the story of Mayhem is not just about music. It's about the eternal hunger humans have for darkness. It's about how easily myth can swallow truth. It's about how destruction, once started, can take on a life of its own. In the end, Mayhem did exactly what their name promised. They created chaos. They became chaos. And they left behind a mythology that still flickers like an ember in the cold Norwegian wind. Some legends burn bright. Others smolder forever. I hope you enjoyed that dark story. Hit the like button if you like the video and follow me. Subscribe to the channel if you want to see more from me. It helps a lot. This is my podcast. It's on Apple and Spotify. I post brand new episodes every Monday and Wednesday. I've got a second podcast dropping very soon, 15-Minute Mysteries with Stacy Lee. I'll let you know when that's live. As always, a special thank you to my patrons. Your support means the world to me, and I appreciate each and every one of you who watch the channel. I know you have so many options. Stay safe, my friends, and be kind to each other, and I will see you next time on Dark Hearts with Stacy Lee. Bye.